Hey guys, remember to like the video and hit subscribe.
And my view, and that was really what that set of pieces was about the argument that even though Biden was clearly going to win the primary, there was still time for Democrats to do something the parties had done in the past and have an open convention. And you could structure the lead up to an open convention in a number of different ways, right? You could have something like a mini primary, but basically you'd have Democrats out in the media, out giving speeches, and their ultimate audience would be the delegates at the Democratic National Convention. And my hope was through that you would find the person for this moment. The thing for Kamala Harris that was really difficult was she was for another moment. She was picked by Joe Biden in 2020 amidst just a very different political equilibrium, a sense that you had a transitionary moment between two versions of the Democratic Party, maybe Joe Biden reaching a little bit back to the past, to these sort of lunch pail, blue collar Democrats. Joe from Scranton was a big part of the Joe Biden appeal. But also Biden never has a chance if he's not Barack Obama's vice president. And so you have this sort of weird set of historical factors like operating at the same time. There's a desire for stability and experience amidst the chaos of Donald Trump and the pandemic. There is Biden as Obama's vice president, who nevertheless did not run in the election after Obama. I think a lot of people look back at 2016 and think, you know what, if Biden had been the candidate, he would have beaten Trump and we would live in a different reality. And then Biden chose Harris as an effort to shore up his own at least assumed weaknesses, right? He's a white man in the Democratic Party at a time when the Democratic Party is diversifying. And when the view of how you win elections is you put back together the Obama coalition. And the Obama coalition is young people, it's voters of color, and it's enough working class white voters and then college educated white voters, right? That's the Obama coalition. And so Biden picks Harris, for different reasons. My view at that time was I was sort of a Tammy Duckworth person and thought he should have picked Tammy Duckworth. But there are different people out there. And then the kind of moment that Harris was running in just sort of dissipates. First, she has a particular background from California, where she's a tough on crime. Her book is called Smart on Crime Prosecutor. But she runs in the Democratic Party at a time when it's turned on that kind of politics. People want a lot from her personally, but they don't want a sort of prosecutorial character. So she sort of abandons that and never, I think, really finds another political identity, certainly before she begins running, in 2024 that works. But she's a talented debater. She's a very talented performer on the stump, but she doesn't really have a theory of politics and policy that she's identified with. But she's a way for Biden to signal that he understands that him being, in 2020, a 78-year-old white guy, he understands the future is not him, or at least not just him. And he's sort of trying to make a coalitional pick that speaks to his own, potential weaknesses. I think by 2024, you have two problems, right? Once he only steps down, what is it, June? Like they are weeks from the DNC. They don't have time anymore for an open convention. The Biden administration is very unpopular for a number of reasons, but particularly inflation and cost of living. So now you have Kamala Harris running with a sort of anvil of being associated. I mean, it's a Biden-Harris administration. She doesn't really have a lane on cost of living. It's not something she's known for working on in the Senate. It's not something she has a bunch of great ideas about, not something she's great at talking about. It's probably not the candidate you would pick for a cost of living election. And she's had no time to build that out, right? Maybe if she had been running in a primary for, a year and a half, having to fend off Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders and Pete Buttigieg and whomever else, she either would have figured out how to do it, right? Primaries are periods of education and learning for the candidates too, or they would have found somebody else who could do it. But she doesn't get any of that, right? She's thrown into the game with 3 months to go. So, they picked the candidate in 2020 who won. Whether you think Biden's inspiring or not, he was a reasonable pick for that moment. He should have never run for a second term, and he sort of implied to a lot of people that he wouldn't. And then the handover to Harris was a very difficult handover to a candidate who didn't go through any kind of selection process for the moment in which he was running. We'll see what they do in 2028, but the consequences of what they did in 2024 have been severe.
There's two really big questions on the table that I think click together in an interesting way. You asked, one, why did Trump win? And two, why do Democrats have this certain communication style that might make them less interested in coming onto an unstructured 3-hour conversation with you? Let me try to tell a story that connects them. I think Trump's victory in 2024 was overdetermined. There are a lot of factors here. Number one, if you look internationally, incumbents lost all over the world. They lost in the US, they lost in Europe, they lost in pretty much every developed country at rates that we really haven't seen in 50 years. And that's largely because the inflation crisis that came after COVID created an absolute disaster for incumbent establishment power. People couldn't bring prices down, voters were furious, and they were destroying establishment orders all over the world. Democrats happened to be in power, and as a result, they got the brunt of it. That's number one. Number two, if you look at elections over the 21st century, two things are true. One, almost every election is unbelievably close. For reasons that I'm not sure I entirely understand, the parties have gotten really good historically.
It is really weird that, even in our quote-unquote blowout elections, for some reason it seems like in American politics, our elections are always very, very, very close. And they always swing back and forth, over and over again. It's kind of weird from Republican to Democrat to Republican to Democrat. Yeah.
Bizarrely good. at getting each group to come to the polls with about 48%, such that every election is a battle over the next 1.5%. And in a world like that, little thermostatic swings are very important. And what we've seen over the last few years, and there's this theory about thermostatic public opinion in American politics that says that what often happens in politics is one party has a very compelling message of change, they become the establishment, and then they become the victims of exactly the weapon that they marshaled. That then the next outgroup party says, we have a theory of change and we're going to throw out the bums. And the next party comes in and they overreach and then they lose. In a world where you have thermostatic change and every election is very close, you tend to have elections swinging back and forth. So I think that also explains why Democrats and Republicans have struggled to hold on to power for 6-year, 8-year, 12-year terms the same way they did, say, in the 1930s or 1960s. But finally, you have to look at what kind of character Donald Trump is and what kind of a media figure he is. We were just talking off camera about how every age of communications technology revolution clicks into focus a new skill that is suddenly in critical demand for the electorate, right? The world of radio
Somebody's doing something on my hallway, Jesus.
technology is a world in which Franklin Delano Roosevelt can be powerful in a way that he can't be in the 1890s. And then you have the 1950s. Dwight Eisenhower, 1956, I believe, was the first televised national convention. Famously, the 1960 presidential debates between JFK and Richard Nixon take an election that is leaning toward Nixon and make it an election that's leaning toward JFK because he's so damn handsome and also just electrically compelling on a screen. We have a new screened technology right now, which is not just television on steroids. It's a different species entirely. And it seems to favor, it seems to provide value for
Attention whores.
individuals, influencers, and even celebrities and politicians who are good at something like live wire authenticity.
True.
They're good at performing authenticity, as paradoxical as that sounds. Trump is an absolute marvel at performing authenticity, even when the audience somehow acknowledges that he might be bullshitting. He's just an amazing performer for this age. And it speaks to the fact that he seems to be, to borrow Ezra's term, remarkably disinhibited in front of every single audience. There doesn't seem to be this sort of background algorithm in his head calculating exactly how to craft his message to different audiences. He just seems to be like a live wire animal in front of every audience. And I think that compares very distinctly to the democratic character of bureaucratic caution in our age.
Yeah.
And there is a really important distinction between this vibe of the Trumpian ruler and the vibe of the rule follower. And the vibe of the bureaucratic rule follower is a little bit afraid of unstructured conversation, is always performing the background algorithm of how do I communicate in a way that balances all of the coalitions on my side. Because if you look at the Democratic Party right now to compare to the Republican Party, I mean, in 2015, I think there were 4 political parties in America. There was MAGA, there was the center right, there was the Bernie wing, and there was the Biden, Clinton, Obama wing. And what happened is that Trump killed and skinned the center right and is now wearing it as a hat. The entire Republican Party is Donald Trump wearing the skins of the old center right, the Romney wing. And the Democratic Party is still a fight. It's exactly what Ezra described. It's a jungle. And maybe there's something about that jungle nature of the Democratic Party that is making some of its leaders perform this sort of coalitional calculation when they're communicating, such that it makes them less interested in appearing in settings that might cost them, that might not benefit them in exactly the sort of pre-calculated way they have to get their message across. And so there's not necessarily a whole lot of empirics to that theory. I'm a little bit going on vibes here, and maybe Ezra sees some flaws to the theory.
It's an age of the vibe.
It's the age of the vibe. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I'm trying to perform the live
You should
wire
the vibe.
authenticity that I'm describing. But I do think that might begin to explain why you, Lex, might be picking up on a difference between the political vibes, an eagerness and a willingness on the one hand to have kind of unstructured and even chaotic conversations, and to care on the other side about not letting conversations become too unstructured or too careless.
Can I build on that? I know we're supposed to talk about abundance, but I want to talk about this.
There's an abundance of time.
An abundance of time. We're on the Lex Friedman show. So 2 or 3 things. One is Democrats still think the currency of politics is money and the currency of politics is attention. And that's a huge difference between the two sides right now. So what did Kamala Harris come in and do? She came in and raised a ton of money, right? Like $1 billion in record time, basically. She had more money than Donald Trump did, and used it to try to buy attention. What it meant for Democrats to be good at social media is to have a good social media team. People in your office somewhere, in your campaign headquarters, who put out cool things on social media, good memes and good advertisements and so on. What it means on the right to be good at social media is to be you personally good at social media. You're Vivek Ramaswamy, you're JD Vance, you're Donald Trump, you're Elon Musk, and what you understand is you are the product. What it means to be good at attention is you are good at attention. Now, Harris, I think, was actually better at some dimensions of this. They were just slightly older dimensions than people always gave her credit for. Hell of a performer on the stump. She was way better on the stump than people realized she would be. And a good debater. She'd always been a good debater. She trashed Donald Trump in that debate. But She does not do social media herself at any level, right? Because she's not going to take risk. Most Democrats still live in a world where the thing that they are optimizing for in attention is to not get negative attention. And what the Trumpist wing of the Republican Party understands, and this is truer for them than it probably would be for Democrats, because for them, the media is the enemy, or at least the mainstream media is, et cetera, but is that attention, a volume of attention is itself good, and you can only get a critical mass of it if you're willing to accept negative attention. Agenda control doesn't come from positive attention, it comes from conflict. You get agenda control by doing things the other side disagrees with, so they enter into functional agreement with you to keep the thing you're doing at the front. Now, that doesn't make you highly popular. Donald Trump is the most unpopular modern president at this stage of his presidency, except for Donald Trump's first term. It took, I think Nate Silver said it was 221 days for Joe Biden's net favorability to go negative. It's taken something like 55 days for Donald Trump to do the same. So what Donald Trump is doing does not optimize for favorability. It does not optimize, by the way, for big wins. Democrats feel like they got trashed in 2024, and in a way they did. But Trump's popular vote victory was the smallest popular vote victory since 2000, when Al Gore, beat George W. Bush by 17 dogs and 3 old men, or whatever it was. And so attention works really differently. And while I think some of the the Rogan of the left discourse has been frankly overstated, because honestly, the most parsimonious model of 2024 and 2020 is in 2020, you have a 48-48 nation, something like that. Or maybe you have something that's more like a 49 Democrat, 47 Republican nation. And in 2020, because of the pandemic, Donald Trump suffered let's call it a 2.5 point incumbent penalty. People are mad about the pandemic. They're mad about things being chaotic. So he loses 2.5 points. That gives, given the natural split of the electorate, Joe Biden a 4.5 point popular vote victory. In 2024, people are mad about inflation. They're somewhat mad about the border. You have a 2.5 point penalty applied to the incumbent administration. Now it's Harris. And you get a 1.5 point popular vote victory for Donald Trump. I genuinely don't think, and this held internationally too, right? I genuinely don't think you need a lot more to explain the election right now than that. But you do need something more than that to explain Donald Trump's now, since 2016, almost decade-long dominance of all attention in American politics. Starting when he came down the golden escalator in 2015, Donald Trump, American politics from 2015 to 2020, when Joe Biden won, was about Donald Trump. Then from 2020 to 2024, when Joe Biden was president, it was about Donald Trump. And then from 2024 on, it's about Donald Trump. Joe Biden was an attentional void, be it his age, be it their strategy.
This is one of the things I talked about, that me and Dan talked about, that it was actually probably a mistake, the idea that, oh my God, we're like a real president that we're not hyper fixated on all the time, thank God. But it's probably actually not a good thing. You want the attention whores. We live in an influencer economy. Unironically.
He agreed that the topic of the nation should be Donald Trump, right? When he went back to begin his campaign in 2024, he goes to Valley Forge and gives a speech about January 6th and Donald Trump, right? It wasn't about his own achievements. It was about Donald Trump. Joe Biden didn't do the Super Bowl interview, right? In 2023. That's when I did my thing about this is not going to work. Probably because at that point he was not capable of good extemporaneous interviews. I mean, I think that was my view of them, right? That the revealed thing here was that they didn't trust him to do interviews. I didn't have some inside information about anything. I just looked at what they were doing, what they weren't doing. They're behind in the polls. They weren't doing things like the Super Bowl interview. If you can't turn your candidate into the product, and so that was to me the tell. But attention is the coin of the realm. Now, there are better and worse ways of doing it. I don't think Donald Trump is doing himself huge favors right now. I think there was a path they could have walked to be a majority party. I think that if he was more restrained, more inhibited, if he was able to not do a bunch of things that are mobilizing opposition to him, you could talk about what they would or wouldn't achieve that way, but I think they could be in a much stronger political position. That would make them stronger for the midterms. It would eventually make, J.D. Vance stronger as a successor. I think they are running a very high risk strategy that has a very reasonable chance of, if they don't make a, what I would call like an autocratic breakthrough, they might completely blow up their own movement, right? It's all very high risk. So for them, like for everybody, for everything, what makes them good at politics is also what makes them bad at politics. But for Democrats, the caution, the sort of bureaucratic culture, the fear of saying anything that will make anybody mad, it is optimized for a different attentional era. And one of the things I am watching when you were saying about leaders, one of the things I'm watching in the people coming up, the ones who want to run in 2028, is who...
Oh, because everything is like streaming, because that's my perspective, that everything in life is basically like streaming now. I guess something that's kind of funny is one of the things that I always give people the advice, right? The stream through it, all those memes. People will have like a dramatic situation and then they'll think it's like the end of the world. And I'll say, like, as long as you keep making content, generally stuff passes. It's just the way of the internet now. In a way, the Republicans kind of operate that way, such that Democrats function in a way where they're too afraid of having these like negative moments. Republicans don't care because they can just have a negative moment and they'll just keep pushing through it. And then eventually people forget, which is what happens. So that's why they can do like horrible thing after horrible thing after horrible thing after horrible thing. They know it just doesn't stick around because it doesn't.
Who seems like they've adapted to this era, not in the way Trump did or Vance did or Musk did. I think they're going to need something different. They fully represent the Twitter era of politics. I mean, Musk bought Twitter. They're sort of all in on what politics right now, what online politics feels like. I think the thing that will come next is someone who's able to synthesize both the lessons of it and the feeling that we all have that it's kind of sick and poisoned, right? That Twitter's not a good place. X is not a good place. TikTok politics is not a good place, that we're all being turned on each other. Somehow you need to be authentic and authentically angry at what we've all become, in the way that Obama ran as a political reformer who hated the red and blue cut of America, who hated what political consultants and pollsters were doing to us. You're not going to have somebody who just echoes. There's not going to be, there will be no Joe Rogan of the left. There will be no Donald Trump of the left, because the left is different than the right. But it will have to be something authentically of this era, but also authentic to the backlash to it, which I think as we enter into this period where the president and everybody around him fully embraces this attentional economy, I think people are going to want something different from this attentional economy in 4 years.
And be okay with the negative attention that comes with being authentic.
You're going to have some of it, right? You cannot change American politics. You can't change the Democratic Party if you're not willing to upset people. Donald Trump reformed the Republican Party by being able to fight Republicans. He ran against George W. Bush, against Jeb Bush, against Mitt Romney, against the trade deals, against a bunch of things that were understood to be sacred cows. Somehow this guy ran.
How do you counter that? I don't know. I think there's something to be said. There's another type of analysis that I've never engaged in. There's something to be said for maybe the strength of the conviction of what both parties believe in as well. Or I don't know. Maybe that could be untrue. Like one hypothesis is that Democrats believe in the things that they say that they believe in. So when you run a campaign, you're a little bit constrained by whatever Democratic beliefs are. Whereas on the Republican side, like you can clearly see, because of the way that Trump lives his life and the things that he's done and everything, that there are things that Republicans said they believed in that they clearly never believed in, right? So the complete 180 on a hawkish foreign policy, actually 180s just in the past 2 months on hawkish foreign policies over and over again. It might just be that Republicans, ironically enough, are more powered maybe by an emotional worldview that is more reactive to things that are upsetting them. And so you can capitalize on that better on an emotional sense. Whereas on a Democrat playing field, you're a bit more constrained by policy. You have to be within your certain messaging thing. You've got a lot less room to maneuver. Maybe, I don't know.
Like right after Mitt Romney and John McCain, while attacking Mitt Romney and John McCain, right? If you are not, like, the Democratic Party does need to change. It needs to attain a different form because the Obama coalition.
I'm Florida District 1. Valamont does a good job in conflict. She's doing town halls. When people ask questions, she's straight up about her views, even if it's MAGA asking who she knows may not like her answers.
Is exhausted. It's done.